All right. Welcome to Grue, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day and coming on. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you asking me to join you.
Yeah, of course, definitely. So, the first thing I wanted to start asking you is like, when did you know you wanted to write?
Well, that was pretty early on. I have to back up a step here and present a situation that got me into writing. My dad was in the Foreign Service, which meant that we traveled all over the world. We spent most of my youth, in fact, the first 14 years of my life, traveling from Europe to the Far East and then down to the Caribbean and Cuba, which kept me away from school for large periods of time. So my parents filled my those gaps by having me read all the time. They had, stacks of books that they would give me whenever I had these absences from school. So I became a very voracious reader, and then I decided one day, I think I enjoy reading. Maybe I should try writing, and that's basically how it got started. I started. First story I think I wrote was in the fifth grade. I wrote a short story, and my dad took it to his office. He typed it up and gave it to me, and voila, I was a published author.
Oh my God, get it out! Wow, that's a very young age.
Yes, yes. Well, once it hits you, you can't stop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what was like the first book you ever wrote, the first book that you put out for the world to see?
It was called Evil Town, and it's a political thriller. Again, I have to back up a step to explain that. I spent 35 years of my life working in politics and in strategic communications in Washington. I worked on the Senate side and on the House side, and I worked in the Reagan and Bush administration. So I had
Wow.
I had knowledge of politics,
Yeah.
and I just applied my imagination to that once I retired, and I wrote Evil Town, which is about Washington. It's about politics.
Nice. And like are most of the books you wrote based on like true crime stories?
Yes, all of them, all of my psychological thrillers are based on true crime stories or snippets of crime. For instance, the current one, Mapping the Night. I read an article about a year ago in the New York Times about the police were doing a welfare check on the apartment of a young lady who had a son, and neither one of them had been seen for some time by the people in their apartment building. So they got concerned. They called the police. Police came. Unfortunately, they found the woman. She was dead. She had been raped and strangled, and her son, who was only like 4 or 5 at the time, was still alive, and he was applying ice to her face to try and wake her up because he thought this is what she did to him when he was sick. So he would try to revive her by doing the same thing. So you can imagine the police walk into this rather haunting scene, and it just caught my imagination just reading that. Plus the fact they later discovered that the man was a serial offender. He had killed some other women as well, and he always picked on women who were single mothers, uh, and and they had kids. They had boy children, and they also discovered that he cleaned the apartment, not just in a way to get rid of the fact that he had been there before, but he cleaned the apartment like immaculately. I mean, he's psychologically not all there. So I guess this was part of his whole thing. So I put all those elements together: the finding the boy, the ice, and the cleaning the apartment, and all that sort of stuff, and him picking on a certain type of single mother with a boy child, and I weave that into the story, and I do that with all of them. Most of my books, as I said, most of my books are based on a snippet of information that I then weave into a larger story.
Oh wow. And like what what do you like about the true crime world? Like what drew you into it?
Well, I read a lot of true, books, not novels, but true crime stories, and I was always attracted to the why. You know, why do these things happen? What's going on in the mind of the perpetrator that gets them to you know to the point where they're, you know, they're hurting other people. So I, instead of writing true crime, I decided I would write fiction, but so that I would be able to weave in the why. I wanted to know why. What is it? I want to get inside the head of the person, not only the person that's doing the crime, but the people that are solving the crime, because basically you're on both ends of the spectrum. You're the, you know, the good guys versus the bad guys, if you will, to put it, you know, very elementary, and to try and figure out how it is that these people operate and what's inside their, you know, what's their motivation for doing the things they do. Now, there are plenty of true crime books that are fascinating, but most of the why is very technical. It's explained, well, you know, it's because he, when he was younger, he was abused or whatever the case may be, or she went into law because her father was a policeman before that. And the stories are usually much more complex than that. So I wanted to write stories that were complex enough that the reader can say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. I understand that now. That's a why. It gives me the why these people do these things. And that's what drew me to the kind of books that I write.
Oh wow, okay. And it it's funny how like a story would just come to you, because I was reading online like you actually picked up the New York Times, and that's where you saw the story, like, and you know, it's something how like a story finds you to write it.
Exactly. Yes. And as I said, most of my books do that. There's a book called that I wrote called Wretched. It's an interesting story that sparked my imagination. A man had been Ken Rex. His name was Ken Rex McElroy. He was a bully. He lived in a small town in Missouri, I think it was Skidmore, Missouri. And he had been terrorizing this small town and the people in it for like 30 years. He
Hmm.
would steal their livestock. He would threaten them to kill them unless they did certain things that he wanted to do. He actually was a sex offender. He molested a lot of people, a lot of the women in town. I mean, he was an awful person.
Oh
So
God.
after 30 years, and I'm surprised it took him this long, the people in town decided they weren't going to put up with this anymore. So what they did was they formed a vigilante group. And one day he walked out of a bar that he frequented in town and he got in his truck. 30 people surrounded this truck, and only two, they all had guns. Only two of the people had actually had bullets in their guns, and those two people shot and killed him. And when it was over with, they just faded into the woodwork. They were gone by the time the police got there to discover his body. And to this day, they've done, oh, I don't know, countless, you know, investigations, local, regional, and even the FBI. They've never been able to find out who killed this guy. The
Oh
people
my
have been
God.
that tight-lipped about it. So I use that as part of as the beginning of the story, the novel Wretched, and it worked out for me. I was able to write a novel based on that story.
Wow. Wow, that's something that they never found the
They
people
never
that
found
killed.
them.
Wow. Damn. And with your current book out, um, what research did you do for the story and for the book?
As I mentioned, I got this, you know, I got this the kernel of the idea from the New York Times, and then of course to get inside the head of the perpetrator who's running around killing these women, because in the story, a brief synopsis of the story is that there is a serial killer operating in the Upper East and West Side of New York, and to get inside his head to try, you know, to, as I said, I want to know why. I had to do a lot of research for that. And basically, the FBI has a lot of information they put out about serial killers and how it's meant for local law enforcement to read these pamphlets and these tracts and these books that they put out. And so I read all that, and I went to psychological journals and I read information on that, on how that on how these people think, and how to use what they think in order to discover who they are. Because the thing about serial killers that's different from normal, if you should say, normal murder, is that normally a person who is killed by someone he or she knows. And you can,
Oh,
police can use that and they can track that back to who's responsible for the murder. With a serial killer, it's stranger on stranger. So the person who is killed by somebody they don't know.
yeah.
So you start with that, and it becomes a little difficult to track back, to track the crime back. So that's what's unique about the serial killers. And also, what I did some research in order to put the reader inside the story at night when most of it takes place. I had to have a character who was out at night in New York. So I found that there's a condition called exerdoma pigmentosum, I think it is, where people
Never heard
can't
of
go
that.
out in the sunlight because they're allergic to sunlight. So they have to go out
Oh,
at
wow.
night. So I created a character in the novel who had this, what they call XP, this condition, which sent him out. If he wanted to go out, he had to go out at night. And he did. He went out every night, just because he was, he didn't want to stay in all day. He had to stay in all day in the dark. So he chose to go out at night. And he walked around the Upper East and West Side, and also Central Park. And so he was the one who initially discovered that there was something wrong going on. And that's the way I put the reader in that story at night, by using that character. So between trying to do the research, well, between doing the research on how a serial killer thinks and on the person who has this condition, how they would deal with it, I had to do quite a bit of research. But it's fun. I like doing research. I like learning about different things. So this gave me an opportunity to do that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. And when when you're writing like a crime story, like what do you do to get into a mind frame for it? Like a head space.
Well, I, I don't work, I don't think, like a lot of writers do. A lot of writers, they do outlines, and they do character backgrounds and all that stuff, so that when they sit down and write, they have a pretty good idea where they're going with their novel and how their characters are going to react. I don't do that. As I said, I started with this little kernel of a story from the New York Times, and I wrote that out. That became my first chapter, and then I went from there. I never know from page to page really what I'm going to be writing. It's more I put myself in the story, and I say, okay, well, here I am in the middle of the story. How would this character react to the situation? Okay, well, if they react that way, then this is going to happen. By virtue of their action, this reaction will take place. And that's the way I write all my novels. I have no idea how the novel's going to end. Sometimes I have no idea what's going to be on the next page, but I want to. And the reason I write like that is I want to write the way I read. When you're reading a book, you want to be surprised what's on the next page. You don't
Oh,
want
yeah.
to know what's on the next page. You want to be entertained. So I write that way. I want to be entertained by my writing. I don't want to know what's next. And for me, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it definitely has. And what why did you choose New York for your city?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, the original crime took place in New York, but of course I could have put
Mhm.
it anywhere. But I mentioned that I spent all those years traveling around the world, 14 years. And I didn't come back to the United States, live in the United States till I was 14 years old. So I think I calculated one time I went to 10 schools before I ever got into high school. So that's how much traveling around I did.
Oh my
But whenever
God.
we would come back to the States for a visit, we did come back, occasionally to visit the United States. We came back to New York because my mother grew up in Brooklyn. So we would come back to New York. And of course, a kid who doesn't live in the States, an American coming back to the States, is just, I was wide eyed. I mean, I'm back in the United States, my home country. I want to see everything. I want to, meet different people. So New York became kind of my Mecca. my American city. New York became my American city
Nice.
because it was the only city I knew in America.
Yeah.
So when I had an opportunity to place the story in New York, it was a nice thing for me that I could do that. And I did a lot of research on the various neighborhoods in the Upper East and West Side, on a bunch of the New York is as much a character in this novel as the characters, as the human characters. So I did a lot of research on it, and I inculcated that into the book.
Oh wow. Okay. Nice. And what did you like most uh, about like writing the book and making the book?
This particular book, I suppose I told you I put this character that had this XP condition,
Yes. Yes.
trying to imagine him out in New York, wandering around New York in the middle of the night, like he did. He was out between 12 and 5 every night. And he went into Central Park and he met a lot of characters in Central Park. I think that for me was the most enjoyable thing, trying to put myself in his shoes, not only to put the character in New York, of course, and that was, as I mentioned, that was the character I used to put the reader into New York, but also to put him in situations that advanced the novel. Because to give you an idea, he was wandering around New York one night and he comes across a man who's dancing in front of a big apartment building, just wandering, just dancing back and forth. Now, initially, he doesn't think anything of it. It is New York. People do crazy things in New York. But he,
Definitely.
he goes out a couple of nights later, he sees the same guy in another part of, the neighborhood doing the same thing. Goes out another night, same result, sees this guy, and he starts to figure out, wait a minute, this man is doing his little act here in front of these apartments, and all of these apartments are where women have been killed. So he starts putting two and two together. Oh, I see what's going on here, and he starts following him around. And that's the way he initially figures out that there's something going on. Of course, the police do as well, because they discover the body. So you have him coming from one direction and the police coming from the other. And obviously they're going to meet at some point in the novel. But that for me was an interesting way to try and write the plot, where you have people coming from different directions into the novel and finally meeting in the end and realizing what they have.
Oh wow. And like how do you think this book compares to like your other books like The Evil Town and Blood Moon?
It's hard to compare books. It's like asking a parent sometimes to compare their children, which is your favorite child. I enjoy writing all my books, but once they're written, I pretty much put them aside and go on to the next one. I try not to compare and contrast. Now, that having been said, it's like anything else you do. I'm sure that you, from your first show to right now, you've
Mhm.
improved. You feel more comfortable in front of the camera. You know what
Yeah.
questions to ask and so on. Same thing with writing. You get more comfortable with what you're doing. Hopefully, you get better at it. And I've had people tell me that they've read my string of books, and they like the later ones better because they think they're better written. Um,
Okay.
I think that's probably the best way to answer that question. I don't have a favorite, but I do know that they allow me to improve my art. Each one I've written gets a little bit better, I hope. Now, that having been said, there are a lot of people that like some of my earlier ones better because they like the subject matter better. My wife,
Um,
for instance, has a favorite book called Little Wars, which I wrote, maybe my fourth or fifth novel. She likes that
okay.
one best because of the subject matter, that is in the book. So I guess it depends on your taste,
Yeah, true, true. Everybody has different tastes. Like some people like
right?
the true crimes or like a darker like horror type book. Some people like others. So yeah, everyone has a different taste.
Thank goodness, or no one would be reading me.
And if someone wants to start writing stories or movie scripts, like what what would they have to do to to learn? Like what kind of steps would they have to take to learn how to write?
I often get that question, and I begin with my first response is you have to like to write in order to write. And by that, I mean, you can't write to write the bestseller, to write a great American novel, to write, to write with the object being, oh, they're going to make a movie out of it, and I'm going to be walking down the, red carpet. None of that's going to happen. The chances of you writing a bestseller or a great American novel or having the novel turned into a movie are slim to none. Just getting published is hard enough. So, and the other thing is you have to have the discipline to be able to
Mhm.
sit down every day and at least for 3 or 4 hours, not get up from that chair and just write. If you don't have the discipline, you can have all kinds of imagination and great stories in your head, but unless you have the discipline to sit down and write them out, you're not going to be a writer.
Makes sense.
Well, I mean, I have people coming up to me all the time and saying, I have a novel in me. And I keep saying, well, then write it. Otherwise, you don't have a novel in you.
True. And and is it hard to like actually get like if you do write a book, a novel, like is it hard to actually get it published?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I think I read somewhere once that less than 1% of the people who write novels ever get them published. And if they now the answer to that is, well, self-publish, and you can self-publish and put it on Amazon. But then they say the average sales of a self-published novel are pretty dismal, like maybe 100 copies if you're lucky. So yeah, I mean, it is difficult, but I would never discourage anyone from writing if they enjoy writing, because in the end, you're writing for yourself anyway. So
Well, yeah,
if you can self-actualize, if you can, give yourself confidence that you can put a novel together, then go ahead and do it. I mean, what have you got to lose? So 10
exactly.
people, 10 people read your novel. Well, that's 10 people that never wouldn't have read your novel if you hadn't written it anyway. So what the hell?
True, true. And when you aren't writing and making books, like what do you like doing during your free time?
Ha! Well, I have to spend a lot of time with my wife because for 4 to 5 years, I mean 4 to 5 months out of the year, sometimes more than that, I'm pretty much got my head buried in what I'm doing. And she always teases me. She says, even when you come out of that room and you're in the house, you're not really with anybody because you're still thinking about the novel, or you're still thinking about what you're going to write the next day. So I would
Mhm.
say that's number one priority. Also, I enjoy physical activities, working out, running, things like that, and reading. I
Oh,
do a lot of reading. I'll read anything that strikes my fancy. I'll walk into a library and pick up a book and read the first page, and if I like it, then I'll read the book. So and it's also part. It's like an athlete training to run or do anything in their sport. Reading is the training ground for a lot of writers. You get something purposeful from everything you read. At least I do.
and I'm a big horror fan. So are there any horror books or horror authors that you like?
Well, some of the obvious ones like Stephen King and Dean
Oh
Koontz. I've read a lot of their stuff. I think Stephen King is really underrated. But just he is. In my opinion, he's one of the greatest writers. In American writing lore. I think he's terrific. The way he can sit down and weave a story that, at least for me, gets me right into the story. Dean Koontz had some very original ideas that he puts down on the page. And who is the guy that wrote Hellraiser? I can't remember his name.
oh, Clive Barker.
There you go. He's another
Yeah.
one. His is it's kind of, you have to read his stuff pretty slowly because it can get pretty convoluted. But yeah, I like him as well. So I guess those three would be the ones that I enjoy.
Nice. It's crazy. Like mostly like every book Stephen King wrote turned into like either a TV series or a film.
Yeah, and some better than others. I mean, there's so many of his books that depend on your imagination, and you as the reader have to visualize what the character, it's all very imagination driven. So he has
Mhm.
some books that you're looking at the TV or the movie and you're thinking, well, that's not the way I imagined that at all. So it depends. For instance, there was one of his old books. I mean, one of his books it's a movie, an old movie, I guess it was. And at
Oh
the end
yeah.
of the original movie, they had this spidery looking thing that was the monster or whatever. And that's not the way I imagined that at all. So for me, everything was great up until that point. And then I'm thinking, well, that's just not the way I thought that this was going to end at all.
But that clown was creepy though.
Oh, the clown was great, and the clown the way they imagined that from his book was perfect. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the way I saw the clown when I was reading the novel.
Nice, nice. And what about music? Like, what kind of songs do you like listening to?
I'm pretty much a classic rock guy. I love. You're too young, but do you remember a group called Cream? That's
Oh
Eric
yeah, yeah.
Clapton.
Eric,
Yeah,
Eric Clapton. Yeah.
yeah, and two other artists that they were a trio, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, who at the time when they got together were considered the three greatest living artists in rock and roll. So, or
Wow.
in popular music. So I like Cream, the Beatles. Uh, to the more modern group, I would say Black Keys. I enjoy Black Keys, but I'm
Yeah.
not too up on modern stuff. I mean, I go back to Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and Elvis Presley and those guys. Those are I'm old, so those are the guys that I remember from growing up, and I still listen to some of that.
Nice. And what do you think you would if you were gonna do a karaoke song? What do you think you would sing?
Johnny Be Good, Chuck Berry.
Yes, that's a good song. That's a good song. I like that. And what about food? Like, do you have a certain food you like to eat the most?
Oh, the stuff I like to eat most would kill me if I ate it all the time. I mean, I love pizza. I like junk food. I'm a junk food guy, which is why I mentioned a little while ago that I have to run and work out because I'd weigh 300 pounds. Uh, yeah, so I mean, I could eat an entire birthday cake, if someone gave it to me. That's hot dogs, really crap stuff. But I have to say I'm a big salad guy. So maybe I fill in my pizza and birthday cake and with some salad.
See, the salad balances it out. Like if you're eating a hot dog or whatever, like, at least
Right,
the salad balances it out.
right.
And where could fans like find your book, buy your book?
Okay, Amazon, just go on Amazon and type in John David Bethel, which is my full name. Or you can go to Goodreads. It's also on Goodreads. And I have a website, www.johndavidbethel.com. They can find my stuff there. So, almost any place that you can find books, you can find me dwelling in there somewhere.
And do you have social media too? Could fans follow
Oh
you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and ask
I'm on
questions?
Facebook. Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. So you can find me there as well. Thanks for reminding me. I would have forgotten about that.
It's all good. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing the show. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate your having me, and I hope it's entertaining for the people that are listening to it.
Oh, definitely. Yes. All
If
right.
you decide to read the book Mapping the Night, let me know. Get back to me and let me know what you thought of it.
Definitely will. Yeah. Thank you.
It's not a horror book, but I think you'll find it a little dark. If you like dark stuff, I think you'll like Mapping the Night. You'll especially love Wretched. That's really dark.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's very Wretched's very dark because as well as being the story of this Ken Rex McElroy, mixed in with it, I mixed in another story with it was there is a crime down in Louisiana called the Jefferson Parish 8, where eight girls, teenagers, just disappeared over a period of time from this parish. Gone, poof, no one knows what happened to them. There was some thought originally that it was a serial killer. Then they started thinking, no, maybe the drug runners in the area and the police who worked with them were involved. So I mixed those two together. Those, the Ken Rex McElroy along with the Jefferson 8, and put that's where the Wretched came from. So if you like dark, give that a shot.
Oh, yeah, I definitely will. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on and have an amazing day.
All right. You do the same. I appreciate it. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.